North Left Sports Podcast here. Josh and Kyle back from the dead. Here to bring this to the forefront and talk about the NBA. We're February 1st, 2016 today. Kind of the midway point of the season, right before the All-Star break. We just wanted to really touch on who we felt the championship contenders were this season and how they're progressing on their way to somehow stop Golden State from going back-to-back. So the first team we have to talk about, obviously, is Golden State. They're just on this incredible run. They're on pace to beat the Chicago Bulls record to 72-10, and they're probably going to get it. And Kyle, are they going to get that record really quick?
The question is, do you want that record? Because in my mind, it's one of those records where it can wear your team down during the course of the season. It doesn't really mean anything in comparison to a championship. And the question to be answered, like you said, is will they get there? Yes, they're probably going to get there. Their team's so deep, they could probably afford to rest starters. They're not going to until the latter stages of games, and especially Curry's been sitting in the fourth quarter, so they're already starting to manage some of those minutes. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But right now, even being in the West that's overly competitive, they still seem to have the edge, and I definitely could see it happening.
Yeah, it's been helpful that they've just been blowing teams out, and they've been able to rest Curry, especially a lot of whole complete fourth quarters, and then Draymond, Bogut, Iggy, Clay, they've all rested, and they've gotten some really good contribute. Like Harrison Barnes has been able to play a little bit. Brandon Rush has been incredible this year.
Oh my gosh!
So it's just been their system is very good at helping role players become great. Much like the Miami Heat kind of did, the Chicago Bulls, the Lakers, the Spurs, where they build around their stars, which is exactly what you're supposed to do when you get stars, which is something OKC has struggled with a little bit. Mm-hmm. And it's just been incredible. Steph Curry, MVP last year, looks like he's probably the favorite right now for sure. Yep. And he's for sure top 5 player. Is he the best player in the league?
I happen to still believe that it's LeBron James, and I only say that because look at what he did in the finals last year with no roster, literally 1 versus 5 every single game.
It's basically LeBron and Tristan Thompson really stepped his game up, which was awesome for him, and that was it.
And Mozgov, to his credit, had some nice games, and we saw Dellavedova play out of his mind and, try to do the things that, Shumpert and was brought in to do. But I think if I'm starting a team day one, I'd probably go Curry just because he's younger. But if I'm looking for an immediate impact, Week 1, Season 1, playoff series number 1, I'm going LeBron James because he's still a lockdown defender. He might be getting up there in age, but no player can score from any point on the court like he can. And in addition to the fact that he always gets his teammates involved, and he just has that air of invincibility to him where I think guys are intimidated by it, including his own teammates, and so they play up to a higher level out of fear of disappointing Father LeBron.
Kind of like Jordan-like in essence, where it's like
yes.
A lot of these players grew up, like especially younger ones like a Shumpert or a Kyrie, and maybe even a Kevin Love to a small extent, where they saw young LeBron dominating the league at 22. And he's still there being the best player on the team, and he's, starting to fall off his peak a little bit, but still 90% LeBron is still, I agree, arguably the best player in the league.
Yeah. And that's not to take anything away from Curry. He's fantastic. The Warriors are so deep. His defense has improved. We talked about this earlier, but it's still not to the point where it's probably average. It's probably still B-ish, which isn't quite average. And he has so much help that he can just let guys skate by him, and it's really not that big of a deal. So that being said, that's why I give LeBron James the edge in that conversation at this point, even though if I had to start a team in a long-term outlook, it would be Curry.
And speaking of all the help, it's arguable that they have 4 to 5 A-minus defenders on that team. And speaking of a couple of them, is Draymond top 5? Is Clay top 10? Like, do they have 3 top 10 players on this team right now? I happen to think Draymond's top 10 and Clay's like top 20, but the NBA is really top-heavy right now, so it's not really a diss. But, I mean, Iggy's still A-minus defender, and Bogut is still a great rim protector.
I think Draymond Green is absolutely the league's best kept secret, if you can even say that, because this is a guy right now who, all things considered, if he's in San Antonio right now, he's Kawhi Leonard. He's that type of player. He could be scoring 23 points a game with that lockdown defense, distributing the ball. He's basically a walking triple-double every night. Not actually, but you get my point. That's the type of player he is. He's the next closest thing to LeBron James that we have in this league right now. next to maybe like a Kawhi Leonard type, just a player that has an all-around skill set. He's probably actually even a better shooter than LeBron ever has been. So, I mean, he has that going for him, too. The sky's the limit on Draymond Green. Absolutely, I would consider him in the top 5. It's always going to be somewhat objective. Shout out to Jerry West, by the way. Suck it, Lakers. I can't believe you guys let that guy walk away.
And speaking of Klay, I just love that Klay is the ultimate. Sounds disrespectful, but he's the ultimate 3-and-D player.
Yeah.
But he does a lot of other things. But he may be the second best shooter ever behind his teammate, and he's an incredible defender. That is the one thing that I was so surprised at with his development is he became like a top 10 defender.
Yeah.
And he's just great help defender, and he's a great one-on-one defender. And I just want to make sure he gets the praise he deserves as well.
Yeah, game's very important to him.
Exactly. And speaking of players that are all around like LeBron, let's touch on Cleveland. They're the number 1 seed in the East, and they're probably pretty much guaranteed to stay that way. And they're going through a little bit of turmoil. David Blatt got fired. I don't think their struggles are his fault at all, but I also don't think he's bringing much to the table. I think their talent's carrying them, which in some cases always happens. And there are all these Kevin Love issues. Kyrie's coming back from injury, so it'll be really interesting to see how they continue as a team. They're very deep. They have the highest salary in the league, I believe. They're going to pay like $60 million in luxury tax this year or something insane. So it's just going to be interesting to see if they can make a couple minor trades like last year to fill out the roster and challenge the Warriors, if they can come together as a team, going a little bit more up-tempo. Tyronn Lue, like he said, that he wanted to do. So what are your thoughts on the players other than LeBron, like Kevin Love and Kyrie stepping up?
Well, I just want to make a couple points because I read a very interesting article from Brian Windhorst the other day who was talking about the team atmosphere surrounding the Cavaliers. And so before we get into the players, I just kind of wanted to touch on that because I found his comments and his insight to be very, very pivotal to what was going on with the Cavs. And if you don't know who Brian Windhorst is, he's the Cleveland Cavaliers beat writer, and he has been for several years. Very, very smart.
He's the ESPN writer who's followed LeBron around for like his whole career.
Yeah, exactly. I believe he is the Cavaliers beat writer though, too, right?
For ESPN, but he basically is LeBron beat writer.
Right. Okay. So the point is that he was saying that David Blatt, whenever he would get like hey David Blatt, how was your first NBA win? Well, I've won 700 games before. This doesn't matter. So I think that's just one example of how his attitude permeated throughout the building, and it really rubbed guys the wrong way. So while he may not have done anything strategically outside of that timeout against the Bulls in the playoffs, we haven't forgot David Blatt. You're still going to get another chance, but I think Tyronn Lue was absolutely the right choice. And you really are seeing guys like J.R. Smith buying in. You're seeing Iman Shumpert start to return to that post-ACL dominant defensive player that he was in New York. And they've got some interesting guys. I mean, we can still see Dellavedova coming off the bench. Mozgov can still score, although I think he's likely to get moved at the deadline. But all in all, this is a team that, I mean, they still got Varejao sitting on the bench at $10 million a season.
And he probably will never get on the court unless there's 2 injuries.
Yeah.
And speaking of Shumpert, he may be one of the top 5 options you want on in terms of pure defense on Stephen Curry. He guards Curry great.
Yep.
He really does.
He's another very good 3-and-D player. The 3-point percentage isn't quite there, but he's definitely not a guy who you can just let sit out there. So I think they have the depth, and I think that they are all playing for each other now. They're getting back to the pregame celebrations. I'm really, really excited. Major win over San Antonio the other night. I know Duncan was out, but still, they blew them out. It's a big win for the Cavs. I'm really excited with what I'm seeing. And as a LeBron fan, I really do hope he's able to bring one home to the land.
That would be nice for the city of Cleveland and for LeBron's legacy. Keep Kevin Love or trade him.
Absolutely have to keep him.
I agree.
I think he's too good of a player. He was a dominant player in Minnesota. He rebounds. He's got a three-point percentage down to a T, although I will say his highest three-point percentage was 41%. That was in his 3rd year in the NBA. Ever since then, he's been a middling 37 to 38% guy. Would like to see that percentage moved up. I think with the fun that these guys are displaying on the court, that'll come as the season progresses. I still think he has a nice stroke. And I think that once the offense started running through him a little bit more, you started to see some of that potential come to fruition. So unless you can land, and we talked about this earlier because Zach Lowe had mentioned it in his podcast, potentially moving Love to Detroit for like a Contavious Caldwell-Pope type, just to free up some salary and get some some movement because Caldwell Pope in Lowe's summary can potentially guard Curry on the wing and leave Shumpert on Thompson, which gives you a little bit more of a small ball lineup to defend them in the finals with. So that's one interesting take, and Caldwell Pope is young. So there's that too. They can build on that.
I think that it'll be interesting to see how Kyrie steps up to the challenge if they meet in the finals of guarding Curry, because he is the type of player that's like, I want to be the best guy on the court.
Yeah.
And he shows up like it sometimes, and if he can be consistent, especially 100% on defense, and he's going to make Curry work.
Oh, yeah.
And that's going to be a big difference if both teams are 100% healthy and doing what they're supposed to. And I will say that I kind of liked my Kevin Love for CJ McCollum thing I heard, and Bill Simmons talked about that too, and that's awesome. But the issue is McCollum is not there defensively yet. So it would be interesting to see. I just like that for Portland, giving them kind of two stars to build around that I think would get along great in terms of Dame and Kevin Love. And I think Kevin Love's from Oregon as well. So that'd be nice. But speaking of things that are nice, let's talk about how amazing the Spurs are every year. Right now they're in a little bit of a downturn because they've lost a couple games in the last 2 weeks. They kind of got blown out by Golden State and Cleveland over the last week and a half, which isn't a good showing for them. But it's Popovich. Duncan is resting a little bit. I'm sure he could play if he had to, and he's still great on defense. His offense is obviously falling off, but they don't need him to score because Kawhi Leonard is taking another leap. And in my opinion, he's the top 5 player right now. What do you think, Kyle?
I definitely think he's a top 5 player. We've seen Tony Parker have a resurgence this year. His points per game are down, but his field goal percentage is up. He's showing that maybe the injuries aren't affecting him as much as we thought. He's still only 32 years old. He's a feisty perimeter player. He distributes. Manu has still been fantastic. He's like the ghost that always returns. Just when you think you've gotten rid of him, the Ghostbusters have come in. They've eliminated the problem. Here's Manu coming back, haunting you time and time again. He's a fantastic player. All in all, they have a ton of depth. Patty Mills has really shown that, there's no drop-off with the Gary Neal types that they've lost. Danny Green is kind of like a wild card for me because he hasn't really done that much this year. But, we've seen him hit 7 3-pointers in a row.
And speaking of guys who show up in the playoffs every year.
And a 3-and-D player.
And another, a great example. He's a great defender, and he's shown it against kind of guarding LeBron, harassing Wade really well. Yep. He's great against Klay because they both kind of play exactly the same way. Klay's a little bit better, but they're almost a very similar player in terms of run around screens, Reggie Miller, Ray Allen, shoot open, be a great shooter, great defenders. They're very similar.
Yeah. So Spurs, I'm very much looking forward to the Spurs Golden State series in the playoffs if they do end up playing each other, which I think is probably pretty likely. Would you consider that almost like the NBA Finals if the Cavs get blown out in the finals? Would you look back on this year and say that was the finals?
Yeah, and I think that'd also be the case if OKC meets either one of them as well. And whoever OKC plays in the second round, that series is going to be just destruction. We're going to touch on OKC in a second. I just wanted to bring up 2 little things really quick. But Marcus Aldridge, as expected, has fit in extremely well. I'm sure that statistically you'd rather him step back 2 feet and take more threes than Montu's, but his shooting percentage is good. He's fit in well with the team and the aura. He didn't show up against Golden State, but that was kind of a fluky game for the Spurs anyway, because they had 31 turnovers. It was just an ugly game. And the Spurs, they have found 2. Ray McCallum is a solid backup point guard with potential. Jonathan Simmons is a dude I've never heard of before who's turned it as a great backup wing for them. And I just want everyone to Google Boban Marjanovic because he's one of the funniest looking people I've ever seen. He's actually a very solid, nice little big man that can kind of do some stuff. And
great find. 7'3", protects the rim. He's a lot cheaper than Thiago Splitter.
Yeah, and, he doesn't shoot like Splitter, but they kind of do the same thing. Work hard for 10 minutes and then go back to the bench.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of working hard, Oklahoma City is quietly having an incredible season, especially after the kind of 2-3 week slower start to open the year. Kevin Durant's come back and continues to be Kevin Durant, and Russell Westbrook continues to be an absolute psycho.
Yep.
And Deion Waiters is playing better. Steven Adams is doing good. Serge Ibaka is rounding into shape. Enes Kanter is unstoppable off the bench. He's going to get you 25 and give up 26. And it's going to be awesome to see. I'm so excited for Oklahoma City. I think they should be the favorite for the title over Cleveland, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that? Behind San Antonio and Golden State, obviously.
I would not put them above Cleveland, personally. I think that Cleveland has a deeper team, and I think their big 3 is bigger than the top 2 on OKC. I like OKC quite a bit. I think we're finally seeing the team that we thought we were going to see for the next 3 years when they went to the finals and lost. Russell Westbrook, I've been a big critic of his. He's really stepped his game up. I still think that he relies on his athleticism a little bit too much to get him into really good plays. I still don't think he's a top-level NBA acumen type guy. That's my opinion. I'm looking at it from afar. I'm not involved. It's just an opinion. I'd be more than happy to have somebody comment below and challenge me on that. But the fact of the matter is, Durant is an insane shooter. He can create his own shot. He's absolutely a baller. He should be leading this team in field goal attempts every single night. The fact that he doesn't, I find it to be a little bit frustrating. I like Westbrook, but you're right. They have quietly assembled a very nice, deep team of role players. I still don't think it's quite as deep as Cleveland's. I think that their bench is really good, and I definitely think that both of those teams could make a midseason trade that really propels them into the next level. So we may have to reevaluate that assessment post All-Star break or at the NBA trade deadline. But I really like what I'm seeing out of OKC right now.
Yeah, I just want to say that Russell Westbrook is shooting 45% from the field, which is really, really incredible when you remember he's shooting 29% from three and takes 4 a game.
Yeah.
He's unstoppable. He goes 100%, if not 130% every game. I love watching Russ play, even though it's very frustrating. He's averaging 24 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds, and leading the NBA in steals per game. This dude is a madman. And him and Kevin Durant are both top 5 players, and to have 2 top 5 players pretty much on your team at the same time is nearly unheard of. The Lakers had it with Kobe and Shaq, and that is one of the last examples I can remember, because even the Boston Celtics and the Lakers, great teams, they didn't have 2 top 5 players in the league at the same time on their team, because, Kareem and Magic were both top 5, but Kareem's past his prime at the time when Magic was in his. And then, the Bulls had Magic and Scottie, and Scottie was probably a top 5 player with defense, but you didn't think of him as such because MJ was there just overshadowing everyone.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, I don't think necessarily both of those guys are top 5. I think one of them the argument could be made that one of them belongs in that conversation. I don't know how. Let's have a little sidebar here. Projected future outlook. Who would you rather have? Knowing what you know today, Kyrie Irving or Russell Westbrook?
Russell Westbrook, and I don't think it's that close. Really? I think Kyrie's an incredible shooter. He easily has that advantage over Russ, and I think that every other area I would take Russ in as a player.
I wouldn't take him in passing.
I would.
I wouldn't, and I think that he's probably a better defender, but I think that he also is probably a little bit more apt to turnovers. I know Kyrie has struggled with that, but you got to keep in mind there is an age difference there. Kyrie is still only, 23, 24, and Westbrook is now 27. So it's not completely fair to compare where they are right now. I think Kyrie is the better player than where Russell was at his point in his career, and I don't think that's really debatable. That's my opinion. Because of the fact that Kyrie could literally drop 50, 60 points a game if he was not on the same team as LeBron, because he's done it before.
And how many points could Russell drop if Durant wasn't there? Because we saw what happened last year where he carried Oklahoma City into the playoffs with Durant hurt and was averaging almost a triple-double the last 2 months of the year.
He was really good. We saw probably one of the craziest 2 or 3 months we've ever seen in the NBA from a player. And like I said, he's got gobs and gobs of athleticism. I just don't like the way he plays the game. I don't think he plays it with a ton of intelligence or control. He's just a total athletic freak player. Now, I'm not trying to take away his effectiveness. It's just my opinion. We'll leave it at that.
And those are kind of the 4 teams that me and Kyle feel like they're a tier above.
They're
for
very
sure.
much a tier.
But another team that's playing quite well this year is Toronto. Kyle Lowry decided he wanted to get in shape after getting his contract, which is nice of him to do.
We didn't know that was
and DeMar DeRozan has continued to develop. He's become a very nice offensive threat. They're a very well-balanced team, solid coach. They have a lot of pieces and cap room and expiring contracts to make a big deal. I feel like if they can make a deal to add a third banana-type player to bring to that team, that they could potentially challenge Cleveland and give them a really nice run for their money in the Eastern Conference Finals.
I agree with you. I think that, Jonas has proved to be a nice big man for them. He's improved his game a little bit every year. I like what Patterson's able to do off the bench and in a starting role, depending on the day. He's able to stretch the floor. And I definitely think that they're a team that their chemistry is just so high that you could see like almost a Boston situation from a couple of years back when the Cavs played them and barely beat them in the playoffs, just because of their chemistry, I don't think that's realistically going to happen. But they do have some interesting pieces, and I'm sure you want to elaborate a bit more on some of those pieces.
I will say DeMar has improved, but his shooting's still not as consistent as it should be. He gets hot, gets very cold. He's only shooting about 32% from three. Kyle Lowry's taking 7 threes a game. That seems excessive for me, but he is shooting 38%, so not completely horrible. For them, it's just really going to be very dependent on having everything go right for them if they wanted to make the finals. Because they do have Drummond Carroll, when he gets healthy, who's a very good defender, a very good player. And I don't think he's good enough to be that third banana with how top-heavy the NBA is with these 4 really great teams. But they do have a lot of interesting pieces. Terrence Ross can turn it up. Bismack Biyombo has developed into a very nice backup center for them. He comes in, blocks shots, gets some rebounds, gives Jonas a break. And I think that they need that one big trade, though. And I don't know what it could be. Maybe they're a potential Blake Griffin team if the Clippers decide they want to just go for it with Chris Paul while he's there and someone wants to buy on Blake and hope he can come back at the end of the year. Because they would be a team that in the East especially is going to make the playoffs no matter what. And if they can wait on Blake and trade like a DeMar DeRozan, Patrick Patterson at a first rounder for Blake and, let's say Lance or something, and really that could be a game changer. We have Blake and Kyrie or Kyle Lowry as your 1-2. That's a nice 1-2 right there.
Yeah, and then Carroll is a really good 3. I think he's been hurt all year. He just came back, so it'll be interesting to see how he ties into their success going forward. I think that when he was with Atlanta, he was a really good 2-way player. He's a really smart player, obviously coming from that system. And then Corey Joseph is one of those guys who he can hit the 3. He's a smart, intelligent player, and not a bad guy to have coming off the bench.
Comes from the Spurs system, so he knows how to win. He's been in big games.
Yep, and he's not going to make turnovers. He's a very fundamentally sound player. So they're an interesting team. Realistically, I don't see any trade helping them in their plight to try and win a championship or surpass the Cavs. I would just probably keep the core in place and see where it goes because DeMar DeRozan is still very young. Lowry is actually a guy who I would consider moving if the right deal came along because even though he's having career years, the guy is already 29. He is undersized. He's a prime candidate to just have that year where out of nowhere he just falls off into oblivion. So
he is signed to a very nice contract though, so that is helpful in terms of keeping him.
For what he's producing this year, absolutely agree with that. The NBA cap is going up, so that's something you have to consider as well. So,
which makes him a bigger value.
Yeah, no, it is by all means. But like I said, we know about his issues in the past. All he did is take 1 year for him to start getting hurt, for him to start ordering late night pizza again. And all of a sudden, he's on the fat train, calling up Antoine Walker, asking him for a loan. So who knows?
And the Chicago Bulls are another team with tons of talent and all these pieces that don't fit together, but sometimes they do, and they play really well together. They were the 3rd seed in the East for a while. They've fallen off a little bit lately. And Jimmy Butler has continued to develop just like Kawhi and making step up of that ladder. He's a top 10 type player. I don't think he's as good as Kawhi overall, but it's also hard to tell without that Spurs coaching gap. Still a great defender, almost 2 steals a game, 23 points. He has become the best player on that team as opposed to Derrick Rose, who has been nice to see him stay on the court and be healthy this year, but his shooting numbers are really down. He has not returned to form yet. Hurting his eye in training camp did not help at all, I'm sure. But let's give some props to Pau Gasol, who's just been around forever. He's in his 14th season, I believe, and he's still averaging a double-double with 2 blocks a game.
Yep.
Great player.
Yep, and they're another team. They've got McDermott coming off the bench. They've got some.
He's been starting, though, with Mirotic hurt.
Yeah, with Mirotic being hurt, which is only temporary. He had an appendectomy, so, he'll be back, no problem. You're right. They have all these pieces. They should be a lot better than they are.
I really like Bobby Portis and Tony Snell, and they have a lot of their front office is just really good at finding those athletic guys and developing them. But they really struggle, in my opinion, of keeping the really great coach happy and not letting him quit, basically, and get himself fired.
Yeah, that was such a mistake. By all means, by Hoiberg's offense, I get the idea trying to get them to buy in more offensively, but all in all, I just think that when you have a good thing, consistency and longevity is the most important thing in a roster building scenario. And I think it was a major mistake moving away from him. I get the idea that maybe his offensive sets weren't great. Hire an offensive coach to come in and be the assistant. You don't need to fire the guy. Don't change the voice in the locker room. That's just my opinion.
And Tibbs obviously wants to win.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really crazy when he goes to New Orleans in 1 year and turns Anthony Davis into an MVP when he could stop getting hurt every single time he plays 3 games in a row.
Or the Wizards and does it with John Wall.
And then all of a sudden they bring Boogie to town because he wants to play with his best friend.
Yep.
So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I do love Jimmy Butler, though. It's been fun to watch him develop.
Baller.
So we're just going to really quickly touch on some other teams that have been interesting this season. And we're going to talk about the team that has been very up and down due to health. But they are now the 3rd seed in the East, and they're playing great when everyone's healthy, and that's Miami Heat. Let's not forget that they are still great. They have 2 Hall of Famers on their team in Bosh and Wade. Wade, when he's healthy, is still a lights-out player. Game-winning shot 3 days ago. Hassan Whiteside is still just out of his mind. He's averaging 4 blocks a game. Goran Dragic has been up and down and hasn't fit perfectly yet, but when they figure that out, that's another great player they have. They completely stole Justice Winslow in the draft. I mean, that's just without question. Gerald Green has been kind of like their J.R. Smith this year. Comes off the bench, lights it up, or shoots him out of games. Dane's been up and down, probably, on that about to retire 3-4 years, be a role player for the rest of his career.
Yeah.
But it's nice they got Winslow to fill in that spot for the future. I think Miami could be really frisky, and it'd be really fun if they fell at the 4 seed and played Cleveland in the second round, just to see LeBron against his old team, the Wiley Vets against the number 1 seed. That'd be a fun little matchup.
They'd be a motivated team. Yeah, they're interesting. Like you said, we'll see what happens with Hassan Whiteside. The Josh McRoberts trade clearly has not worked out.
He's been hurt a lot, though, as well.
He has, but, it's one of those situations where that's the player you were trading for. He had 1 good year, and he had been hurt a lot in his career. So, they took a chance. It wasn't the worst trade ever. But one other guy I really wanted to...
I believe he's a free agent signing.
Was he a free agent?
I think so.
They traded for him.
Either way.
No, you're right. I think that he was a free agent signing. So interesting pickup either way. He's not starting, but they're a team that, it's not very often you have an MVP, Amari Stoudemire, on your bench. That's a joke for everybody listening.
Hey, he's still shooting 54%. So he's a great mid-range jumper. He pretty much can't do anything else at this point, but obviously that is so injury-based with him.
Yeah.
Such a sad way to see how great he could have been.
That first year in New York was really exciting.
Yeah, and then he just hurt his knee again, and it was over.
So interesting, guys. They're a team that's just a savvy group, just a real savvy group. They could really contend there, but all in all, I would think we talked about this earlier. The Pacers are a team that they have some budding talent. I think they were written off a little too early, and I have to say I was a little guilty of that. But when you looked at the roster, they did lose Lance. They lost Hibbert. Obviously, Lance was 2 years ago. Hibbert this offseason.
Well, the heart and soul of their team left in David West.
Yeah,
and obviously he was past his prime, but my main concern, besides, is Paul George going to be Paul George again, which he's proven emphatically is a yes. Which is awesome to see.
Position.
Yeah, and it's, he's been kind of switching back to the 3 lately because they're starting Turner with Ian Mahinmi a little bit, but it's just so good to see. I want great players to stay great. I don't want injuries. I just want to see the best players at their peak play against the other best players, and it's been really great to see that with Paul George. And now that Miles Turner's back from injury, he's been tearing up the league for about the last 2 weeks. Maybe it's just a rookie boom and they're going to adjust, but still, it's nice to see a guy with that much talent show what he can do when given the rock and play off of Paul George and play off of Mana Ellis, who was a nice little signing for them.
Yeah, and that I wanted to kind of bring that up because this is a guy who's been maligned for his defense throughout his career, and right now he's ranked 21th in the NBA in defensive win shares, which I think yes, you can look at that stat and say it's team dependent. There's a lot of other factors that go in, but there's still something to be said for the fact that he's ranking that high. Last year he was ranked 85th, so it just goes to show you that he has made some sort of improvement. And let's just flash back, by the way, to 2011 when the Golden State Warriors were having this internal conflict on who they wanted to move forward with as the face of their franchise, Monte Ellis or Stephen Curry. It seems laughable now, but guess what? At the point, they were both extremely terrible on defense, and they were both volume shooters, albeit Curry was more successful earlier in his career, but Monte Ellis was a 22-point-a-game guy right from the get-go. So it's just funny to look at that and consider, what would have been if they had moved on from the wrong player. I don't think they were ever really considering moving on from Curry, but at the same time, it is something to be said that, they did make that decision. And I just thought it was really interesting that he did that.
It is. Can't forget that Curry had major ankle issues at the time, and that was a legitimate medical concern. So it's nice to see that he stayed healthy, kind of like Paul George. And speaking of Monta Ellis, let's talk about his former team, the Dallas Mavericks, who it was very interesting summer, losing the DeAndre sweepstakes, which unfortunately for the Clippers, but fortunately for the Mavericks, has turned into a blessing in disguise because they started scrambling. They need a center. Yep. They weren't able to pick up Hibbert on the cheap because that was another guy they were kind of thinking about a little bit because he didn't have to give much for him. Look how LA got him, and he's still garbage. But they were able to pick up Zaza from the Bucks, and he's been not a top 10 center or anything, but he's been absolutely perfect for the price and for what Dallas needs right now.
Yeah, he's raised his field goal percentage by 5%, which I think is a major is worth major accolades just because of the fact that he is taking more. He's not taking a lot more shots, but he actually increased his efficiency, knowing that defenses are at least somewhat queuing in on what he's doing. He's not playing that many more minutes. He's still only at 29 per minutes this year, and his rebounding total has just skyrocketed from a career-high 7.9 in his second year in the NBA all the way to 10.7 this year. So definitely not a bad consolation prize for a team that missed out on the DeAndre Jordan sweepstakes at the last minute. Been a very good role player for them. Doesn't really mean anything. They're not going to do anything. But at the same time, the fans needed something, and he's filled in admirably. Props to him.
And, I don't think Dallas really, like almost all these teams, like we said, don't really have a shot to win the title. No. But it would be helpful. And you've seen it in the way their offense has moved the ball and scored. When Parsons is healthy, he is a very good piece of it because he is another outside shooter that is great. And he's a solid defender and athletic. Yeah. And he meshes well with Dirk. Those two play together very well. And obviously when you have a top 5, top 3 coach in Carlisle, that really helps you a lot. And speaking of really good coaches and teams that mesh well together, the Atlanta Hawks have been very quiet, especially considering last year they had Coach of the Year, 4 All-Stars. All their starters were named Player of the Month, which is really cool to see happen. Yeah. But they've been really up and down. Horford's been down this year. Korver's been down a little bit. Jeff Teague, there's been trade rumors recently because they want to give Denise Schroeder a little bit more playing time, who I'm a fan of. But Paul Millsap has just continued to get better. He's making little mini jumps, but he's just great signing, great player, perfect fit for that team and offense.
Currently ranked 10th in win shares. He's a fantastic player. He plays offense, defense, can stretch the ball, can score in the post. A fantastic player. Really makes you question whether or not the Jazz made the right decision in moving on from him because, him in that situation right there with Trey Burke, Exum, Gordon Hayward, Rudy Gobert, this is a team that all of a sudden has a completely different outlook. And they probably could have added in free agency or via the trade market as a pretty valuable team. So, it goes to show you that sometimes teams make the mistake of not overvaluing or not valuing their players enough. They're so afraid of overvaluing a player.
Well, especially young players, because they were kind of thinking, we can't have Millsap because we got Gobert, who has some potential, who hasn't shown it yet, but they had Derek Favors as well, who is a very talented, very solid offensive forward, and Cantor. And if they would have just traded Favors and kept Millsap, even if they had Cantor, they would have had a really nice rounded team. And if you just traded Favors for Millsap right now, I think Utah's in the playoffs. Yeah. 8 seed, 7 seed, not going to do much. But Millsap, Hayward, Gobert is a very nice front court.
Much friskier, for sure.
Absolutely.
So that's interesting.
So speaking of being frisky, Boston, they have a 15-man rotation. None of them are A-plus players. Their best player is an undersized guard that should probably be their 6th man, and Isaiah Thomas, who's had a fantastic year. Jay Crowder, overall, may be their best player, but he's a good forward, maybe small ball 4 who can't be the number 1 option on your team, but it could be a great third banana. He'd be the perfect third banana, I feel like, on a title team.
Yeah, he's a pretty player.
They have a lot of interesting pieces. This is the team that's kind of like what Houston Rockets were in terms of, hey, superstar X, let's give you the Brooklyn pick and some young guys, and we can make a big deal. I mean, this is the perfect team that has the great assets for, maybe trading for a Blake Griffin if the Clippers want to cut bait, because they have pieces that would help now and in the future. But let's just touch on Thomas and Crowder a little bit, because those two guys have improved, and even with their improvement, Boston is still on the fringe of being, the 6th, 7th seed, maybe even falling out of the playoffs as some other teams jump up there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the things is Isaiah Thomas is currently ranked 14th overall in win shares, which I think is something to be said for a guy who was smaller. And you know, really does make me reflect on what could have been if the Kings had the foresight to lock him up. Because really, when he went to the Suns, everybody in the industry felt like that deal he got was below market. We were all very surprised. He was an up-and-coming player. He can score from inside, outside. Yes, he's smaller, but he's just such a potent offensive player. Ranked 14th overall, like I said, in win shares. What could have been with a Rondo, Boogie, Isaiah combo. And I just wanted to really quickly...
That'd be an interesting night out at the club.
Oh, seriously, man. And then you got Rudy Gay just, like, sitting in the back, like, you know...
Sipping on some Jameson neat.
Nobody buys him drinks anymore. Yeah, and Jay Crowder, just a quick note before we move on, ranked 13th this year in defensive win shares. He was ranked 111th last year. And let's just really quickly reflect on that Mavs to Boston trade. The Mavs received Dwight Powell, who's actually carved out a very nice role in Dallas. Rondo is balling and Shaq Mento. And Crowder has, like you said, really evolved into a solid two-way player. I would say Boston won the trade, no question. It just begs the question, is it time the Mavs start focusing on player development rather than always trying to build a veteran-laden team? With Dirk aging, expect that organization to change their focus.
Or at least, you know...
Or at least try to make more of a hybrid attempt where they have made no attempt.
Yeah, they're like, let's have a whole bunch of cap room and try to bring a star, and then we're going to strike out because none of the stars want to come here. So then it's like, let's spend our money on Monta Ellis, who was a solid signing, but not what they were trying to do, though, with that cap room at all.
Why would you pay Chandler Parsons $15 million a year when Jay Crowder is making not even a quarter of that, and he's probably a better player?
And with no injury history either, at all.
Well, in fairness, though, Parsons did not have an injury history going into that.
He had minor injuries in Houston. He had the type of body where it's like...
It's a little lanky.
Yeah, exactly.
I didn't think it was like... You know, at least when I thought of something, I didn't think about injuries as being like a real major play. But it just goes to show you that, you know...
And only for a 2-year deal, too, which is evolving your risk as well.
Yeah.
Like, if you think Parsons is worth that $15 million a year roughly at the time, even though you knew the cap was going up down the road. Yeah, and it's just like, why not lock that guy up longer? If you believe in him, awesome, and, you know, prove yourself right and maybe give him more years and less money overall.
Very good point, but in that defense, he did position himself to get into this new NBA cap.
Which probably...
So he was trying to parlay this into a better deal, which I don't blame him on doing, but you're right. The Mavs could have definitely pushed for... you know, a long-term deal.
Or at least guarantee that third completely or something like that. I mean, looking back, there's just always options.
Yeah.
The last team we want to touch on, who is one of the more interesting dark horses for sure that's not a top 3 seed, there's a lot to talk about, would be the Los Angeles Clippers.
Yeah.
There's all this stuff going on in the news where everyone's like, they're playing better without Blake. Like, their record has been awesome. It's a more free-flowing offense. They don't have to worry about playing Blake and DeAndre at the end of the games. And then, of course, Blake, almost coming back from his quad injury, decides, let's have a little bit too much fun in Toronto and punch the assistant equipment manager twice, once inside and outside, who also happens to be a foot and a half shorter than him and probably 100 less pounds maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, there's pictures of him online, and maybe I'm way off in his size, but that is not the type of thing you want to see from the face of your franchise. Obviously, he's a great player when he's on top 10 player. In the playoffs last year, he might have been the third best player in the NBA. He had a great showing in the playoffs. But injuries are starting to pile up. Does he really want to play with Chris Paul? Because Chris Paul is not an easy guy to get along with. He's an incredible player, surefire Hall of Famer, maybe the best point guard that's been in the NBA since Magic Johnson.
Yeah.
I mean, great player. But
it's by far and away the best point guard of all time.
I agree. And it's
I shouldn't say that Stephen Curry's out there right now. But
it's really interesting to see how this team has tons of talent, and for some reason, for the last, 3 years, they can't find a small forward, even just to defend, not do anything else. They have still not figured out that DeAndre can't play in the last 6 minutes of the game because of his foul shooting, and everyone wants to change that, and I'm in the minority where I don't want to change it because be a better free throw shooter.
Yeah.
You should not get added value to yourself as a player and have a rule change. Yes, it ruins a game. Yes, it slows it down. But be a better free throw shooter. How about you take him out of the game and do something else?
Yeah.
So I don't think they're going to trade Blake because he's so young and he's so good. But it is definitely more likely now. Would you agree?
I think it's more likely than ever, and I think we're seeing how limited of an offensive structure Blake Griffin plays into. Let me ask you this question: would you trade him
It depends completely on the return, obviously.
Right.
If I said this, maybe even on the podcast last year, that I think a perfect trade for the Clippers at the time would be Blake Griffin for Paul George. This is before the trade. The Paul George was Paul George. He was recovering from injury, and I think that would have been a perfect fit for what they were building and what they were doing. Obviously, that trade would never happen now. Paul George is too important to that team and that city. But if you could give me a couple of young pieces, like I mentioned, DeMar DeRozan as a potential building block. Blake's clearly a better player, and Toronto have to do more. But that is the type of young player I would want in return to get back, especially with Blake being injured. You get a guy that can play now that may be worse, but he's better for the team chemistry, and he can fill a different role. And they could also play a smaller lineup because Paul Pierce is definitely past his prime, but you can get a small ball forward that kind of help you deal with the Warriors as well.
Here's one idea. I'm just going to throw that. It just came to my mind. And it might not even work out financially. Would you, if you're the Clippers, trade Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan for Gordon Hayward and Derek Favors? You get your wing. You have a center who's athletic, he can make plays, he can hit free throws, and the reason why it's good for Utah is because they get a guy like Blake who's locked up into a deal, DeAndre's locked up into a deal, they get the chance to build around them, and it allows...
They also have a star, they've pretty much, besides Mona Stockton, they've always been looking for. Deron Williams had a really nice run there, but I never felt like he was a star.
He was on the cusp, but he was always in Chris Paul's shadow. And it wasn't really that debatable.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one interesting...
I don't think I would want more, and I don't think that's going to happen. I feel like they're going to trade one of them, and it may be in the offseason. Those two, they can't win a title with their team right now. They just can't. And Chris Paul has, 2 years left? Maybe 3, where he's at that elite level. He'll still be a really good player because he's so smart and such a great player. But when he falls off, they could completely be a 7th seed in the West, stuck in that middle ground where you don't want to be, where you have no shot to win the title, but you're not in the lottery with that chance to get even a Miles Turner who could be something, especially with how bad they are at drafting.
Yeah, I know.
And I think Doc Rivers needs to fire himself as GM because he's not doing that good of a job, in my opinion. No. You're going to sign Josh Smith, who isn't a great player, but he, in that for Houston last year, he did some stuff. Yeah. It showed that he caused a little bit of problems for some teams. Then you don't use him at all. You're going to bring Lance in. You don't start using him until the last 2 weeks. Yeah. At least use the early part of the season to see what you have in these guys you sign. And if they're not doing it, then cut them. Yeah. That's what San Antonio does all the time. They do different lineups. They try different sets. They do different playing time. They rest people. I'm not saying just straight copy someone, but if a team is winning and has a good idea, incorporate that. The NFL is a great example of that.
Yeah.
College football, college basketball. See what someone else is doing and try to meld it. Obviously, you can't be the Warriors. You don't have the 2 best shooters ever. But, do something different. Change it up.
The NBA is because of the Warriors, is a copycat league. Teams are moving to smaller levels.
Atlanta as well.
Yeah, so it's just one of those situations where it's really disappointing because Chris Paul is one of our favorite players, an absolute treasure to watch. Treasure. I can't even... He is the ultimate treasure to watch. He's one of my favorite players. He's such a good player. It really, it's sad to see his prime get wasted by these melodramatic, soap opera type stars. Because I don't know about you, but outside of the fancy dunks that Blake Griffin makes, he has a really ugly offensive game.
I disagree.
He's not a very good jump shooter. Every time he's in the post, it seems like he's wailing around, and it just looks hard. It doesn't look smooth.
I disagree from the standpoint. In the post, does he have great moves? No, he's okay. He's passable. Is he a great shooter? No. But he is an incredible player in the high post from a standpoint of passing the ball and running the offense. I like watching him when he has the ball facing the basket in that high post range and making a strong move to the basket, taking a jumper if he's open, or especially looking for cutters and passing. He's a very good passer, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's not necessarily he's a bad player. It's just, sometimes you like to see a player, or you'd hope to see a player just play with a little bit more finesse than Blake Griffin has shown at times throughout his career. But he's still a great player. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I'm just, calling it as I see it. It is our podcast.
If Kevin Love goes to you, as the Cleveland GM says, hey, it's just I'm going to continue to try my hardest and try to win here, but I think it'd be best if we made a move. What about a Kevin Love for Blake type deal? Both young players, both signed up. Kevin Love would be a very nice player, in my opinion, next to Chris Paul offensively. That'd be an interesting trade.
I don't know if it really helps the Cavaliers, though. I mean, he shrinks the floor. He's very ball dependent. He's not really like an off-ball type player. You've already got two ball-dominant players in Kyrie and LeBron. I really don't see that being a fit. That's my personal assessment. I think Kevin Love is finally hitting stride. If I were to deal Kevin Love, I would be very interested in defense. I would need a guy who I know could defend the wing. So, I mean, that's one of those situations where there's just not really a lot of guys out there like that. I mean, we mentioned at the top of the cast Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, but, I mean, outside of that...
If I'm Detroit, I don't do that. Keep your own team growing together.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that, but at the same time, they do have a little bit ways to go. Kevin Love accelerates that process just a little bit, and he does fit into that Ryan Anderson stretch four type of...
Well, there are rumors that when Anderson's a free agent, he's just going to go to Detroit and be back with Stan anyway.
I wouldn't blame him. I mean, that's exactly
and he would be perfect next to Andre Drummond. Exactly. And they have a Morris twin. I can't remember which one, to be honest, but he's been playing really well, so you could easily just swap those two out.
Yep.
What about Blake Griffin for Horford, Denise Schroeder, and a pick? That you get big for big, plus a young guard to develop behind Chris Paul, and you get a first-rounder, and then the Hawks kind of change it up, get a better overall player, and somebody who can play that high post with Millsap still. I mean, that's an interesting deal. That way they still have Teague.
That actually adds life to Horford's career.
I agree.
Because he doesn't have to play center.
Yeah.
You know, and he let DeAndre bang out, and then when you got to go small in the last 6 minutes, no problem.
And since Horford's really developed himself as a nice mid-range jump shooter, he could, become that guy that is playing like a David West in terms of not really nice longevity as he ages well.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see if, I'm just trying to throw ideas out there.
Well, if you're the Clippers right now, you know you can't win this year. There's really not much of a chance. Let's be honest. Let's really be honest. Let's take a cool look in the mirror. Would you call Boston right now and say we want the Ben Simmons pick? Would you take that trick? Would you do that now, knowing that you might not get the number one pick?
See, the issue...
But you would get the most transcendent player for the next 15 years that you could possibly want.
The issue with that is then you are completely wasting Chris Paul for 2 years. So if you were to do that, which is a very good idea, in the offseason, you immediately try to trade Chris Paul.
Right.
You get as much young nucleus talent as you can get. And then even if you don't get that first pick, there's also young players besides Ben Simmons who aren't on that level that have a lot of good potential. I mean, Brandon Ingram, Skal Vissabrain from Kentucky, I probably messed up your name, I'm sorry, but there's some other, this is a very solid draft. So even if you have that pick now and it ends up being 4 instead of 1, you can still rebuild very quickly with all the assets you have. Now, that also means Doc is gone, and you fall back, and that Staples Center just has 2 garbage teams in it, which would be interesting.
Right.
But if you were to go that route, then you immediately need to trade Chris Paul. Because you're just not going to win with Ben Simmons or Chris Paul, because by the time Ben Simmons is where he needs to be, Chris Paul is going to be lower, and it's just the primes don't mesh up.
Right.
And that's just natural. It's age.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, that's one interesting thought. So, I mean, that's one situation. I mean, honestly, it's tough, when you have a guy like that. It's hard to break up the band. At this point, you almost just got to see if they magically have a run. I mean, that's really your only option right now. They still have a lot of good pieces. I mean, J.J. Redick is finally hitting all of his shots. Jamal Crawford.
It's because he has a sleeve tattoo now. He's getting tatted up.
Get a tattoo?
No, he's full sleeve on his right side, I believe now.
Oh, wow, so he's more edgy now.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that.
This has been his best year by far. J.J. Redick's been off the charts.
I have been a huge critic of his because I always think, why is this guy getting paid to shoot threes when historically he's not that great of a three-point shooter? And he's not that great of a defender, let's be honest. He's a good defender.
He's passable. He's passable.
Yeah, he's a good defender that is always in position.
But he's also...
But he's not locking anybody down.
No, but he's also plays a position where there's a lot of pressure on him to be a great defender.
Yeah.
And it's in transitioning to this more run and gun 3 styles actually helped him as a defender because when you have a Danny Green or a Klay Thompson, he can't really, he's a little small to guard him, but at least you can say, hey, JJ, go run around in circles with him because he does the same thing, so he knows how to get around screens a little bit, so it actually fits his defensive liabilities a little bit better than it used to be just be like, hey, J.J. Redick, there's Dwayne Wade, lock him up.
Right.
So it's helped him in different 2 ways. This the way the league is kind of morphing a little bit to the what it's become now.
Yeah, no, interesting. Could you see a team like Oklahoma trying to trade for Jamal Crawford or J.J. Redick and trying to give up one of their younger pieces off. I'm trying to come up with who that might be in my head. But like a contending team that kind of needs a guy to come off the bench who's not Dion Waiters and really maybe generate some offense a little bit more consistently. Whether the Bulls are a team that could benefit both teams because of the assets. I mean, you have to really look at it and see what lines up. But I mean, they're a team that needs another scorer coming off the bench.
The Bulls don't line up, in my opinion, well for Blake. But they could line up well for a J.J. Redick if they decide that, hey, let's just blow it up, which they wouldn't because they're too close to the Saints. But maybe in the offseason, if they're like, hey, let's bring J.J. Redick in because Chris Paul's gone, DeAndre's gone, they're going to retool around Blake or something. Let's trade Bobby Portis for J.J. Redick. Right. Bobby Portis and a filler for J.J. Redick or something. That'd be an interesting deal.
Would you trade Jimmy Butler for Jamal Crawford and Blake Griffin?
No. Because the Bulls have too many big men. So if you were to do that, then you got to be like, all right, so then who's going to take Noah's horrible contract, or now we can't develop Bobby Portis? I would rather, if I was the Bulls, I'd rather trade for Blake and keep Jimmy Butler somehow.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to put Butler and Blake together as a nice 1-2. It's the younger, and they're developing a nice 1-2 if you had to do it that way. But like I said, I don't think they can trade for Blake just with what they have right now.
Right.
Unless they do trade Jimmy Butler.
That has assets.
Yeah, Milwaukee has a ton of assets.
They could maybe make a move. If for instance, if you're the Clippers right now, do you think about maybe moving Blake for like a young Giannis type or not straight up obviously?
You mean Giannis?
Yeah, Giannis.
I don't think Milwaukee trades him. What about Blake Griffin for? Well, I was saying Blake Griffin for Greg Monroe, and we'll throw in Jabari Parker.
I was thinking Parker and Giannis.
I think that's too much to give up from Milwaukee, but I'm a big Giannis fan.
But and not to mention Monroe is so porous defensively.
Yeah, but you have DeAndre though to guard the rim, so it helps a little bit.
Or you're saying DeAndre goes to Milwaukee?
No, I'm saying that when Greg Monroe comes to town, you have DeAndre to back him up,
if
and it's
a deal for him, that would be interesting. Yeah, and Parker would give them a wing. He's not a very good defender.
Yeah, but he's also young, and him and Chris Paul I think would be a really nice pick and roll screener. Because you have to guard Jabari on that mid-range jumper. So.
Yeah, no, for sure. And he's a young guy. He can be convinced to play deep.
So it'll just be interesting to see what happens with this Blake situation. A lot of things going on with the Clippers. And who knows, maybe Blake could get healthy and they'll make a nice run. Because they certainly hate the Golden State enough where they all could show up. But I just don't think they have a shot. So, Kyle, is there anything else you want to touch on really quick in the NBA before we lock it up here? Boogie's been out of his mind. Minnesota has 2 potential top 15 players when they develop in Wiggins and Towns, who's been a great rookie. Porzingis has taken the league by storm, even though he's very up and down. Melo's decided he wants to pass now when he's not hurt. I mean, anything you want to touch on real quick we didn't hit?
Yeah, 2 quick things. Excited to see Mike D'Antoni back in the lead. I think the way teams are going right now totally suits his style. Him, Thibs, Mark Jackson, among others. There's another big name out there that I'm not remembering for whatever reason right now. I'm really excited to see some of these head coaching jobs open back up in the NBA and see what they can do. And then also, I just wanted to give a little bit of love to Jared Sullinger. This is a guy who didn't get drafted very high. He's still first rounder, but didn't get drafted high enough because of his knees and the perpetual problems that those are going to bring throughout his career.
And his back, too.
And his back, but he's still only 23. He's been one of the best defensive players in his limited minutes this year, and he's just been a very nice piece. A lot of that goes to Stevenson's coaching, but I just wanted to kind of give a shout-out to a player who would have went a lot higher in the draft if he didn't have these injury concerns, and he's really proved, to be worth that pick that Boston took him. So I just wanted to give him a little shout-out. He's having a really good year.
Just want to say that my boy Boogie Cousins is the only player in the NBA in top 5 in points and rebounds. When he's not either A, a complete psycho, or B, missing a whole bunch of shots, when he's on his game, he's pretty much unguardable, and he's really carried the Kings, him and Rondo's reemergence a little bit, have carried the Kings to a lower playoff seed, and I hope that they make it. And, they're not going to win, but they can make some noise because they do have some talent. Yep. Rudy Gay's still solid. Omar Cassie's a nice little piece off the bench. If McElmore decides he wants to develop randomly, they could be a frisky dangerous.
Now, what's up with that guy?
Minnesota, I just love seeing that team play with Rubio and with Towns and Wiggins and Levine and Shabazz Muhammad's doing some stuff too. I just like what they're bringing to the table. Anything else you want to hit at, Kyle? Because I think I'm about done.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank the listeners for tuning in today. I thought it was a great podcast. Just the first of many to come. We really want to cover content on just NBA, MLB, NFL. We think it's important to be well-rounded. We just want to keep you engaged throughout the year. And we really appreciate anybody who listens to this podcast through and through. I know we've rambled a little bit. Again, feel free to put your comments down below and get at us on Twitter. I'm Chaos Sport, that's KHAOZSPORT. He's J Street at JAYSTREET.
Yeah, JAYSST, J Street.
Yeah. J Street. Okay, so JAYSSTREET. So hit us up on Twitter. Until next time, fam.
Out.